Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. There's some real contention to discuss. There's trouble brewing in the boxing kingdom as Devin Haney, the undisputed lightweight champion, has decided to go through the realm of RIDDICK BOWE and to bin a very prestigious title. Let's talk about whether he's right or wrong to think this way. Let's try and find some clarity in how we should observe the pound for pound ranking list. But beyond that, this also touches upon another very important topic within the sport of boxing. You know, as far back as I can remember, well, I always wanted to be a gangster. No, wrong movie. Sorry about that. Wrong clip. If you can tell me what film that's from, you get bonus points. But no. What I meant to say was, as far back as I can remember, there's always been a chicken versus egg debate. Is it the champion that makes a belt, or is it the belt that makes the champion? Well, this has been catapulted back into the limelight here because Ring Magazine have decided to release some rankings, and it's caused a little bit of controversy. At number 1, they have Alexander Usyk as their pound-for-pound king. At number 2, Naoya Inoue. At number 3, Terence Crawford. 4, Errol Spence. 5, Canelo Alvarez. 6, Vasily Lomachenko, which has caused a particular backlash. We'll get to that later. At number 7, Dimitri Bivol. 8, Josh Taylor. 9, Jamel Charlo. And at number 10, Artur Beterbiev. Now, this caused a real reaction from Devin Haney, who was not a happy boy at all. He came out and he said the Ring Magazine could keep their belt. You won't see me with it before or after this fight. He also went on to say the youngest undisputed champion of the 4-belt era and not on the pound-for-pound list is crazy, especially when guys who don't even hold the Ring Magazine belt currently have made it onto the list. Get the F out of here. Well, let's examine this because some very esteemed boxing scribes, including a number of writers from Ring Magazine, decided to bite up and respond to Devin Haney. You had first and foremost Dougie Fisher. Douglas came out and said, then mail it back to us, champ. If you don't want the belt, mail it back to us. And Michael Montero said, in most cases, who you beat matters way more than the belts. And the number of title defenses matter too. It's a combination of things that contribute to the overall body of work. Steve Kim also decided to pipe up, and you guys know I'm a big fan of Steve, very funny guy as well. He decided to put out a very sarcastic pound-for-pound list. Tom Gray of Ring Magazine also responded to somebody who asked, how is Loma getting a spot ahead of Haney? The guy doesn't even have a ring belt or any other belt for that matter. And Tom Gray said Loma has won titles at 3 weights. Loma has been elite since 2014. He is still elite. He dropped 6 spots from number 1 when he lost to Teofimo Lopez. No pound-for-pound number 1 has dropped off the list on the back of 1 loss. Be realistic. So this has caused a back and forth, as you can see here, and it's causing some controversy. And it ended with Devin Haney replying to Douglas Fisher to say, no problem, DM me the address and I'll have it sent out, brother. So it looks like Devin Haney is looking to bin the prestigious Ring Magazine belt, which is why I was saying before, is it the belt that makes the champ or the champ that makes the belt? But has Devin Haney overreacted, or does he have a point here? Is he right to demand that he'll be on the list? Let me explain my view of how the pound-for-pound list should be working, because obviously he's going down the realm of RIDDICK BOWE here, and the majority of people don't consider RIDDICK BOWE to have acted in a way that he should have acted. Most people that I certainly have come across in my lifetime seem to feel that Lennox Lewis was the guy that was in the right, and this actually damaged the legacy of RIDDICK BOWE in the eyes of many. Great fighter for sure, but they don't see him as the king of that era. They see Lennox Lewis as the king of the era. Well, if we go back to this Ring Magazine pound-for-pound list, personally, I don't agree with all of it at all either. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's always going to be subjectivity. We're always going to see things a little bit differently. But is Devin Haney right to react this way? Well, let me explain to you exactly how I think the pound-for-pound rankings should work. Hatman, for instance, did a video recently on this pound-for-pound issue, and we know that Hatman doesn't like them. It's a really good video. Check it out. He doesn't like them, and one of the reasons he gives multiple reasons, but one of the reasons he doesn't like them is that you have this almost speculative analysis whereby a lot of people will say, well, if Bud Crawford was a natural heavyweight, would he beat Alexander Usyk? And Hatman's point is, if he was a natural heavyweight, how do you quantify what that means? Does he carry heavyweight power now? And if so, Have you slowed him down, or does he still carry welterweight speed and agility and stamina? Because if he does, and you're giving him heavyweight power, well, then how's Usyk going to compete? But on the other hand, if you're going to slow him down, if you're going to lessen his stamina, to what extent do you do that? Even just making him taller. How tall is he? Do you make him taller than Usyk? Do you make him shorter than Usyk? So Hatman's talking about this, and he's saying there's too much of a speculative nature. And this is true. And in that regard, when you are comparing directly, it really does not work. However, there is a method in which you can look at pound for pound, in my opinion, in as much an objective way as possible. There's always going to be nuance there, and that nuance will inject inevitably subjectivity. The way I see it, it's about how dominant you are compared to your peers. Your peers are those in your weight division, your rivals in your weight division. Now, even the peers can change because you have new talents emerging and so on and so forth. But by and large, you know when somebody's rising together who the main threats are. And if there's longevity there, you will have other main threats that are coming for that guy within that same division. So for me, you have to have proven yourself to have been dominant in at least one weight category in order to be very high up on the list. Now, what does dominant mean? Does being undisputed in the way Devin Haney is equate to being dominant? You have officially become the undisputed champion. You are the number one guy beyond dispute in terms of having the belts. This is true. But if I was to ask a lot of people, did you rate Kambosos in the pound for pound list when he had the belts? A lot of people would say, yeah, but Devin Haney had the WBC. The WBC themselves tell you that that was their secondary belt. But even if you considered him to be a unified champion than Kambosos, would you have put him in the pound for pound list? If not, why not? You have to be consistent. But additionally to that, if Kambosos was not one of the top elite fighters at lightweight, according to you, so let's say you did not rank him above the Four Kings despite his victory over Teofimo Lopez, and you also did not rank him above Vasyl Lomachenko, then he's Devin Haney's best win, and yet he's not a top 4 or 5 lightweight in the division. So what do you do about that? Now, we can argue back and forth about this all day. So let's just say, for argument's sake, we'll concede that Kambosos was only the unified champion and that Devin Haney had another belt. If that's the case, and your sole criteria is the belts, because it's far too subjective to start to apply nuance to the debate, then why would Errol Spence be high on the list? Errol Spence has never cleaned out the welterweight division. He's never proven himself to be the king of any single given division. Unlike, say, Canelo Alvarez, Terence Crawford, Alexander Usyk, Errol Spence, as terrific as he is, has never proven it. But a lot of reasons that people have him high up on the list is because Errol Spence has a very good resume of names. He's got the likes of Kell Brook. Now, Kell Brook was considered possibly the best welterweight in the world at the time. He was certainly in the conversation. But him aside, who is his best win? Well, his best win apart from that is Sean Porter. Danny Garcia is too small, big name, but too small. Mikey Garcia, big name, too small. Lamont Peterson's a good fighter, but you can't really say he was elite. Ugas, very good fighter. But again, you knew when Errol Spence was going to fight Ugas that this was not going to tell you who the number one guy in the division was, right? So here's the point. When Errol Spence is beating a couple of very good guys in Kell Brook, who I felt was elite, and also Sean Porter, who is world class for sure, but not necessarily elite, right? You would never have put Sean Porter on a pound for pound list. So you have one superb win in Kell Brook. Then you have a few other very good wins. Is that enough to say that Errol Spence deserves to be high on the pound for pound list? For me, it's not. And here's why. At no point did you ever look at these wins and think to yourself, this guy is now beyond a doubt the number one guy in the welterweight division. He's proved it. He's the man. Because you had Manny Pacquiao. You've got Bud Crawford. And now, because there's this delay in establishing it, you've also had the emergence of some young sharks who are looking very sharp. Boots Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, Conor Benn, Stanionis, all these guys. Now, I'm not saying he would have to beat all of them to establish himself as king, because Bud Crawford is more from his era, right? These other guys are new. They're almost youngsters trying to take over the throne. This is more like Tyson Fury wanting to overthrow Vladimir Klitschko. It's different. It's a new era. If Errol Spence does not fight Bud Crawford, though, then because he did not prove himself to be dominant in that era, well, then he starts to move his legacy. He shifts his legacy to relying on the new era. He then has to clear out the other guys. And if Bud Crawford's still there with the belt, he's going to continue to say, yeah, okay, you beat Boots, you beat Stanionis, you beat X, Y, Z, but I'm still here. If Bud Crawford loses his belt, say he fights Boots Ennis and loses, for argument's sake, well, now, because Errol Spence has shifted that legacy to a later period. He's now having to beat Boots. In other words, there's never been a point in which you look at Spence and you say, beyond a doubt, he is the king of the division. You may assume he's the best in the division. If there's a marathon, he's leading the way. He's got the best wins in the division. He's got the most belts. He's leading the way. But he's not past the finish line. He hasn't left it beyond a doubt. What Devin Haney, although he has the belts, he's also leaving doubt in the sense that, is he better than Tank? Is he better than Ryan Garcia, Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez? Do you see what I'm saying? So I don't believe that Ring Magazine have done something terrible here, even though I disagree with them having Errol Spence high up on the list for the reasons I've said. Now, they've probably got Errol up there because he does have those recognisable names, and he's been in a lot of title fights, he's had a lot of title defences, and there's longevity there. That's probably their analysis. In other words, what they seem to be placing an emphasis on is something that is absent from the career of Devin Haney. So it's nothing to do with hating on Devin Haney. They're just putting a focal point on an area that applies more to Errol's career than it does to Devin's. With regards to Vasyl Lomachenko, Tom Gray makes a great point. When you're number one and you lose, you're not going to fall off the list. And additionally to that, it goes back to that concept of peers. This is his third weight category. He dominated peers and he's moved up further and further and further. One question that I always ask, if Andre Ward was at light heavyweight, right after he beat Kovalev, he decided he was going to go up to heavyweight and fight Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder, as he threatened to do, and Andre Ward lost, does that make him less of a fighter at light heavyweight? Does that lower his pound for pound ranking? No, not in my opinion, because those are his peers. You compare him compared to his peers. If he goes and beats a heavyweight, then my word, it goes to a new stratosphere in terms of his pound for pound rating and ranking, because ultimately pound for pound means for your size. How good are you pound for pound? So it's compared to what your natural size is. Now, this does raise another important question, and that is, at what point do you grow out of the weight? Lomachenko hasn't been in those lower weight categories for a long time. So I'm not saying Lomachenko definitely deserves to be in the top 10. He put in a terrific performance against Richard Comey. But does he deserve to be on the pound for pound list above the likes of Josh Taylor, who cleaned out a division? He proper cleaned it out. Not like Devin Haney, winning all the belts in one fight against a guy that even Devin Haney fans don't consider to be elite. Yes, there was controversy in his fight after that with Jack Catterall, and it looks like we're getting a rematch, which is great. But prior to that, he cleaned out the division. Same with Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo has cleaned out the division. So is Vasyl Lomachenko justly above the likes of Josh Taylor and Jermell Charlo? Because if you're talking about form, they should be above him. If you're talking about history and depth of CV, he should be above them. The problem is, at what point do you outgrow your weight category? He is no longer... His peers are no longer guys that are smaller than him. You could argue that Lomachenko is now a fully fledged lightweight, even though he's smaller than them. He's been there for so long, he should have acclimatized. Is that the thought process? Maybe. And that's not unreasonable to say that. So it's not unreasonable when people say Vasyl Lomachenko, like Errol Spence, is too high. Okay? So these are where the complicated subjective areas of nuance come about. Perhaps once you lose at a new weight category, if you then don't go back down, so Canelo's gone back down to super middleweight, so he doesn't lose his positioning massively. He stays in that pound for pound list because he's still king of the super middleweights. Had he not been able to go back down and he was to stay at light heavyweight, once you lose, maybe from the perspective of pound for pound, it's best to say that your position resets to some extent. You fall a few places and now you have to rebuild at light heavyweight, or in the case of Lomachenko, at lightweight. So it's not that I'm against the thought process of what they've done with Lomachenko. They've dropped him a few places and they're expecting him to rebuild. I get that. Perhaps though I would have had him a little bit lower personally. I would have had Josh Taylor and Jermell Charlo, based on form, above Lomachenko at the moment, particularly because Loma has also been relatively inactive. But then again, I would also have those two guys above Errol Spence. And regarding Jermell Charlo, yes, there are always new sharks circling. Fundora, Tim Tszyu, that's the new generation. But he's proven himself now as the number one. He proved himself as the king. So to me, they have to be above Errol Spence, even though he has more recognizable names, simply because there aren't that many elite names that are his size that he's beaten. He's got Kell Brook, he's got Sean Porter. Danny Garcia's smaller, Mikey Garcia's smaller. Lamont Peterson's a very good fighter, but again, not somebody I look at and think, you know, wow. Ugas, brilliant fighter, but again, not really elite. It's a deep CV. It's a deep CV, but it's not one that conveys kingship. He hasn't ripped the crown away from his counterparts. This isn't a guy who sought the lands within the welterweight division and decided to maraud across them and take the thrones by force. He may be capable of doing that, but you do not get credit for maybes. You also should not get credit, by the way, just to sidestep a little bit here. You shouldn't get credit for not beating a guy yourself, but having another guy that perhaps you've beating a rival of yours. You shouldn't get that credit. You don't absorb somebody's CV if you beat them, and you also don't diminish your responsibilities as a fighter because somebody else did your job for you. This is why, for instance, just to show you that I'm consistent, when Tyson Fury was talking about being the best ever and we did a video and we discussed his status and stuff like that, didn't I say that he has to beat not just Alexander Usyk, but Anthony Joshua too? Because when you consider the kings of his era, yes, Deontay Wilder was one of them and he cleaned him out, but he may very well have been the number 4 out of these 4 heavyweights. Let's say, for argument's sake, you have Tyson Fury at number 1, Usyk at 2, and maybe Joshua at 3. Well, you can't just beat number 4 and then claim to be the king of the realm, and you've got another couple of kings just waiting there. Just because one king defeated another king in battle, you don't absorb that just because you've beaten Alexander Usyk. When George Foreman absolutely obliterated Joe Frazier, absolutely battered him, did you see everybody else in the division back then say, well, we don't need to fight Smoking Joe? That never happened, did it? When Joe Frazier beat Ali after Ali came back from his long layoff, did we hear people want to avoid Ali? Or Ken Norton, when he beat Ali, did people say there's no need to fight him? When Lennox Lewis lost to Oliver McCall or Hassan Rahman, yes, he avenged those defeats. And his stock may have fallen before he avenged those defeats. But are you sitting there and you're saying there's no need to fight them? Did Lennox Lewis see no need in fighting Mike Tyson after Mike Tyson had lost to Evander Holyfield? It doesn't work like that. But anyway, although this is all linked in how you rate someone and rank someone, I've digressed a little bit. I'm not sitting here trying to grab some pom-poms and do some cheerleading for Ring Magazine. They're all big boys. They're intelligent guys. They can make their own arguments. I don't have to agree with them. But it also doesn't mean that there's this agenda against Devin Haney. They've tried to be quite consistent with their approach. In my opinion, they've been a little bit inconsistent in some points here with Errol Spence. But you can disagree without feeling as though you are being somehow persecuted. Now, this could actually work for Devin Haney. It could give him that bit between his teeth. He may feel there's an injustice. Psychologically speaking, he may want to prove people wrong. Maybe this works for him. If so, his father, Bill, is going to continue to turn that screw. See how these guys are doubting you. They don't want you to get to the top. Let's create a us versus the world mentality. Maybe that's what he needs. But as an outside observer looking in, I think he's overreacting here. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents, about this. And finally, before we go, I'm not going to spend long on this. Anthony Joshua apparently will be out 4 times, according to Eddie Hearn, between now and the end of 2023. I can't envisage how they will do that if he's fighting really elite fighters. Eddie Hearn did say they're looking at a top 15 fighter for his first defense. I say defense, he hasn't got a belt. What am I talking about? For his first comeback fight. But what that means, you know what these governing bodies are like. What sort of top 15 are we talking about here? I remember when David Hay made a comeback, they had Mark Damori in the top 10 at one point. So is it a legit top 15 guy? If so, and he's going to be out and that active consistently, wow, man, there's going to be some big demands there on AJ. I would imagine he's going to have a couple of big names, but then in between those, potentially have some easier fights. You know, he has been speaking about all the pressure that he's always felt under. Surely they're going to want to give him an opportunity to work on some stuff, particularly if he stays with Robert Garcia or even if he moves to a new trainer. They're going to need time. So let me know what you think and how you think they're going to guide AJ's career. Are they certainly going down the developmental route here? Or do you think they're going to have to take big risks because DAZN demand it? They're paying an awful lot of money to have AJ. So maybe they feel they're willing to take risks with Anthony Joshua as an asset that maybe a trainer wouldn't want to take with him. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Thank you for watching. Give me your opinions on all we've spoken about. Please don't forget to hit a jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Take care. God bless.